There are decades remembered for their headlines, for the music that shook the airwaves, or for the fashions that marched across sidewalks and schoolyards. But what made the 1970s unforgettable were not only those bold moments of disco lights and bell-bottom jeans. It was the smaller things, the ordinary things, the little pieces of daily life that seemed so common, so forgettable, that no one thought they would ever fade away. And yet, it is those very details that come rushing back to us now, like the scent of a kitchen on a Saturday morning, or the hum of a television late at night. Welcome, dear listener, to Sleepytown Radio. Here, we wander slowly back through time, not chasing noise or spectacle, but instead gathering the quiet treasures of memory. Tonight, we drift into the 1970s, a decade not just of change, but of comfort. A time when the most ordinary objects, a lunch counter stool or a plastic food container, could hold entire worlds of meaning. Think of how something so simple, a toy, a color, even the way the TV would fall silent at midnight, could anchor the rhythm of family life. These things may have disappeared from the store shelves and the sidewalks, but in memory, they live on, vivid and warm. They remind us that life's story is not written only in history books, but in the kitchens, classrooms, and living rooms where we once sat, laughed, and dreamed. So settle in. Let your mind rest easy, because in the next few moments, we'll step back into that world, and perhaps the first thing you'll remember is the way aluminum foil once turned an ordinary TV antenna into a magical bridge between you and your Saturday morning cartoons. There was a time when the heart of the living room wasn't a sleek, flat screen hanging weightless on the wall. It was a bulky television set, heavy and humming, its screen glowing faintly like a window into another world. And with that television came a ritual, an unspoken game of patience and hope, played out almost every evening. Every family had their own version of it. The rabbit ear antenna, thin and stubborn, always seemed to have a mind of its own. You could twist it this way or that, lean it forward, tilt it backward, even lift the entire set a few inches and hope for the best. And sometimes, nothing seemed to work. That was when the kitchen came into play. Someone, often a father, an older brother, or a determined child, would disappear for a moment and return with a roll of aluminum foil. The foil was torn with care, crinkled into strips, and wrapped around the antenna like a kind of secret weapon. No one could explain why it worked. The science was never clear, and the logic was questionable. But when the picture came into focus, when the fuzz and static melted into a Saturday morning cartoon or a baseball game, it felt almost miraculous. Children learned the art quickly. They would hold the foil at just the right angle, step back slowly, and then freeze, like statues, once the image sharpened. "Don't move," they would whisper fiercely, as though even breathing too hard might undo the magic. And the rest of the family obeyed, afraid that one careless step across the carpet might send the signal spiraling away again. Some households went a step further. They taped the foil in place, locking in what they believed to be the perfect configuration. It became a permanent fixture, part of the TV itself, like a strange metallic bow tied proudly atop the set. When it failed, and it often did, people blamed the weather, the wind outside, or even the dog brushing past too quickly. Excuses were endless, but the truth was always the same. Television in the 1970s was as fragile as it was cherished. Looking back, it is easy to smile at how makeshift it all was. Aluminum foil was meant for leftovers, not for technology. Yet it became a bridge between families and the programs they loved. It connected children to cartoons on a Saturday morning, teenagers to sitcoms and late-night movies, and parents to the evening news. In a way, that foil carried more than just a signal. It carried the shared moments that unfolded in front of that flickering screen. The memory of it is more than technical. It is emotional. It's the memory of sitting on a shag carpet, cross-legged and wide-eyed, watching the picture waver between static and clarity. It's the hush that fell over the room as someone adjusted the antenna, the collective gasp when the picture finally appeared. And it's the small triumph felt when a strip of foil, ordinary, crinkled, shining, turned a stubborn screen into a doorway of wonder. Today, our screens stream instantly, sharp and effortless. With a swipe of a finger, we can watch nearly anything we want, in perfect quality, anywhere we are. And yet, something has been lost. The struggle, the laughter, the patience, the tiny victory. It all belonged to another time. A time when even the act of watching television required a little faith, a little creativity, and a lot of togetherness. For those who remember, the sight of foil wrapped antennae still carries a quiet charm. It speaks of evenings when families gathered close, not scattered into separate rooms, of a world where entertainment was fragile, fleeting, and all the more precious for it. And so, as we linger in that memory, let us carry forward the warmth it left behind. Because sometimes, the greatest treasures of the past are not the shows we watched, but the way we watched them, together, in living rooms bathed in the glow of flickering light, with aluminum foil catching both the signal and our imaginations. There were countless small rituals that made the 1970s feel so alive, moments when everyday life seemed simple and yet full of quiet wonder. And one of those rituals often unfolded not in a home, but in the heart of the town itself, at the Woolworth's lunch counter. Imagine stepping through the glass doors of a Woolworth store. The air carried the faint scent of new clothes and freshly printed paper, the rustle of shopping bags, the echo of footsteps on polished linoleum floors. And tucked inside, just beyond the aisles of socks, toys, and stationery, there it was, the lunch counter. It was not glamorous. It was not meant to be. But to those who remember, it was magical. A long stretch of counter lined with red vinyl stools, their chrome bases shining under the glow of fluorescent lights. The edges were trimmed in polished metal, the menus laminated and slightly worn from the touch of countless hands. Children would race to climb onto those stools, spinning until they were dizzy, waiting for the gentle voice of a server to ask what they wanted. Mothers, tired from errands, would rest their purses at their feet and take a breath, comforted by the familiar sound of sizzling bacon from the grill. Teenagers leaned on the counter, sharing secrets between bites of French fries, their laughter mixing with the clink of dishes and the hum of the soda fountain. The food itself was simple, comfort food before the term existed. Grilled cheese sandwiches, golden and crisp at the edges, with melted cheese stretching as you took the first bite. Thick chocolate malts served in tall glasses, cold enough to make your fingers numb as you held them, pie cooling under a glass dome, slices served with whipped cream, sweet and steady as the seasons. If you asked kindly, a scoop of ice cream might appear beside your plate, large enough to stir a little envy in the sibling sitting next to you. It was not fast food. It was familiar food. And perhaps that is what made it so special. There was a sense of belonging at that counter, as though the simple act of sitting down connected you to everyone else who had done the same before. For children, Woolworth's was more than just a place to eat. It was a place to watch the grown-up world go by. It was where crushes were shyly confessed over a shared soda, where best friends made plans for after school, where gossip floated through the air like sugar in coffee. For parents, it was a respite, a chance to pause in the middle of errands, to sit still for a few moments while the children were occupied. Servers often knew their names, and sometimes even their favorite orders, carrying a memory that felt as comforting as the meal itself. And when the plates were cleared, when the stools stopped spinning, families often left with a small white bag of leftovers, packed neatly into the same orange Tupperware that so many kitchens seem to hold. The memory of Woolworth's, like that Tupperware, endured long after the last bite was eaten. Today, the name Woolworth's survives mostly as a faded sign on the wall of a forgotten mall, or as a word whispered with nostalgia. But in its time, those lunch counters were more than just places to eat. They were gathering spots, landmarks of community life, woven into the rhythm of daily living. To remember Woolworth's is to remember a slice of Americana that has quietly disappeared, yet still lingers in the hearts of those who once sat at those counters. The sound of forks on plates, the warmth of a grilled cheese, the dizzy spin of a red stool. Together they form a memory that time cannot erase. And as we leave that counter behind, we carry with us the feeling of comfort it gave. Because in the 1970s, even the simplest places held a certain magic. Sometimes, all it took was a sandwich, a smile, and the steady hum of conversation to make the world feel whole. There was a time, not all that long ago, when every American kitchen seemed to hold the same small treasure. It wasn't silverware passed down through the generations, or crystal glasses tucked away for holidays. No, it was something far humbler. A set of plastic containers, burnt orange in color, with lids that gave a satisfying little burp when pressed into place. It was the Tupperware of the 1970s. Step into nearly any kitchen of that decade, and you'd likely find a stack of them on a shelf, or cooling in the dish rack beside the sink. The color alone is unforgettable. A deep, almost glowing orange, the shade of autumn leaves and shag carpet, of sunsets and soda pop. These containers weren't just useful. They became fixtures, quiet companions to the rhythm of family life. Mothers, grandmothers, and even the occasional bachelor uncle all trusted those sturdy orange tubs. Leftover spaghetti, half a sandwich, last night's pot roast, they all found a second life inside Tupperware. A little burp of the lid, and somehow you felt sure it would last until tomorrow. The containers themselves seemed indestructible. Dropped on linoleum floors, left too close to the stove, or stacked precariously in the freezer. They survived it all. But Tupperware was more than just storage. It was a symbol of order, of care, of a kind of domestic pride. Open the refrigerator door, and there it was, a neat row of orange circles, stacked like a puzzle, each holding something saved. It wasn't only about food, it was about not wasting, about stretching a meal, about remembering that even the smallest bits mattered. Children knew Tupperware too, though often for reasons other than leftovers. For some, the orange tubs held cookies, carefully rationed by a watchful parent. For others, they were the containers of small secrets: marbles, rubber bands, baseball cards, and stray pennies rattling around in the bottom. And in countless garages across America, you could spot those same orange lids perched atop tubs filled not with food, but with screws, nails, and bolts. Tupperware had a way of slipping into every corner of life. And then there were the Tupperware parties. They were as much a part of suburban life as backyard barbecues and Little League games. Women gathered in living rooms, sipping coffee or perhaps a small glass of wine, while a smiling hostess demonstrated the latest set. There was laughter, polite applause at the burp, and the promise of keeping leftovers fresher, longer. What seemed like a simple container became somehow a piece of social connection. Looking back now, the orange Tupperware feels almost immortal. Many of those same pieces, bought for a few dollars in the 1970s, are still in kitchens today. Their color may have faded a little, their plastic slightly worn, but they endure. Unlike so many of the gadgets and fads of that era, these containers outlasted their time, becoming part of the very fabric of memory. When we think of the 1970s, we often recall the music, the fashion, the headlines. Yet sometimes, it's these quiet, ordinary objects that hold the deepest resonance. An orange container, sitting quietly in the fridge, holding tomorrow's lunch or yesterday's pie, is as much a symbol of the decade as any disco ball. And perhaps that's the real magic of the immortal orange Tupperware. It wasn't glamorous, and it never tried to be. But it was there, steady and dependable. A little piece of everyday life that tied families together in its simple, plastic embrace. Even now, if you close your eyes, you might almost hear it. The gentle pop of a lid releasing, the faint clatter of plastic against the kitchen counter, the warm hum of a refrigerator standing watch. Small sounds, small moments, yet stitched together, they become the soundtrack of an era, preserved inside a humble, unbreakable box of orange. There was a time, not all that long ago, when a family road trip began, not with a glowing GPS screen, but with the wide, unfolding drama of a paper map. Thick, glossy sheets folded into neat rectangles, waiting to be spread across the hood of the car or the kitchen table the night before a journey. The father, or sometimes an older brother, would pull the map open, its creases crackling like old parchment. It was far too large to see in one glance. You had to stretch your arms wide, smoothing it out across your lap while your elbows brushed against the vinyl seats. The highways appeared as bold red or blue lines, while the smaller roads, the ones most likely to get you lost, were no more than thin gray threads weaving across counties. Every town was a dot. Every rest area a small square marked with a symbol that promised a picnic table, a water fountain, or perhaps just a chance to stretch your legs. Children would crowd around, their fingers pointing to names of places they had never seen. Amarillo, Topeka, Tallahassee, each one sounded like the title of a story waiting to be told. And then, on the open road, the map came alive. The driver would hand it over the seat and say, "Check where we are. Find Route 66. And suddenly, a 10-year-old in the back seat was no longer just a passenger, but a co-pilot. The responsibility of turning the map the right way, of tracing with a finger the line of the road, felt like a serious duty. Sometimes the map was upside down. Sometimes you lost the place entirely. But the sense of being trusted, of helping to guide the family car through the unknown, was unforgettable. Of course, the map did not always keep you from being lost. Roads forked unexpectedly. Signs grew confusing. A promised exit failed to appear. And when that happened, it was not uncommon to hear a sigh from the front seat, followed by the quiet shuffle of a rest stop break. Rest stops in the 1970s had a character all their own. They were small islands of civilization carved out of long stretches of highway. A cluster of picnic tables shaded by thin trees, a row of vending machines buzzing in the heat. Maybe a playground with a metal slide too hot to touch in summer. Children would tumble out of the car, stiff from hours of sitting, and race toward the swings or the bathroom, while parents stretched their legs and leaned against the car, sipping from a thermos of coffee. The air was heavy with the smell of gasoline, fresh asphalt, and pine trees. Or sometimes the faint, sweet scent of honeysuckle drifting over from the woods. The rest stop was never glamorous. The bathrooms were plain, the water fountains often tasted metallic, and the grass was patchy. But for a traveling family, it was a moment of pause, a chance to breathe, to reorganize the car, to share sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. The laughter of siblings, the sound of a soda can popping open, the creak of the station wagon's doors. It all became part of the rhythm of the trip. When the break was over, the map returned to the lap of its young navigator. The lines would be traced again, the path clarified, and the adventure continued. Sometimes you were right on track. Sometimes you had drifted miles off course. But in the end, the wrong turns often made the best memories. A diner you never expected to find, a scenic road you would have otherwise passed by, a little town that surprised you with its kindness. Looking back, those road maps and rest stops were more than just tools of travel. They were part of a ritual, a shared experience that turned every trip into something more than miles and destinations. They gave children a sense of importance, parents a chance to pause, and families a chance to be together in the small, ordinary moments that would later become extraordinary in memory. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the crinkle of the paper map unfolding, the call of a parent asking, "Which way do we go?" and the relief of spotting a rest stop sign after miles of endless road. These were the little treasures of 1970s America. Simple, fleeting, but forever etched in the hearts of those who lived them. There are certain childhood memories that come rushing back with the faintest whiff of a familiar smell. And for many children of the 1970s, that smell was not of fresh-baked cookies or even the scent of crayons, but of something much simpler, a freshly sharpened pencil. In classrooms across America, lined with chalkboard and pull-down maps, students sat at wooden desks with metal legs that rattled against the floor. And tucked neatly into the grooves at the top of each desk was a yellow number 2 pencil. Smooth, hexagonal, and shiny, it was more than just a writing tool. For some reason, those pencils carried a curious, almost sweet aroma. one that children could never quite resist. It wasn't unusual to see a student lift the pencil close, giving it a little sniff as though it were some treasured object. The scent came partly from the cedar wood, freshly shaved away by the whirring blades of a sharpener bolted to the classroom wall. Every time the crank turned, curls of shavings spilled out, releasing that warm, woody fragrance that filled the room. Teachers might not have noticed, but the children certainly did. There was something oddly comforting about it. Maybe it was because the smell marked the start of something new, the beginning of a school year, or a clean page waiting to be filled. Maybe it was because that scent clung to so many memories. Spelling quizzes written in careful block letters, doodles sketched in the margins, secret notes passed across the aisle. For kids, pencils weren't just tools, they were companions. Some guarded theirs jealously, carving initials into the wood or chewing nervously at the erasers until they were worn to nubs. Others traded pencils like treasures, exchanging a shiny new one for a friend's with a bright pink eraser cap. Each pencil seemed to carry a story, even if it was as small as who had touched it last or what page it had written upon. And yet, at the heart of it all, it was the scent that stuck with people. Ask someone who grew up in those classrooms, and they'll tell you that smell was as much a part of childhood as recess on the blacktop or the taste of chocolate milk in a cardboard carton. Decades later, that memory lingers. Walk into a stationery shop, pick up a freshly sharpened pencil, and for a moment, you're 10 years old again. The teacher's voice drones on, sunlight filters through tall classroom windows, and the faint sound of a fan hums in the background. You glance down at your pencil, still warm from the sharpener, and you smile without knowing why. It is strange, isn't it? How something so small, a whiff of cedar wood and graphite, can unlock a flood of memories. How it can remind you not only of school, but of the friends who sat beside you, the chalk dust that clung to your fingertips, the way time seemed slower then. The curious scent of school pencils is not something sold in a bottle, nor something easily described. It is a simple fragrance, but also a key, one that opens the door to a childhood long gone, yet never entirely lost. And in that way, those pencils were not just for writing. They were, in their own quiet fashion, vessels of memory. There was a time, not so very long ago, when television had a bedtime. In the 1970s, as the clock crept past midnight, the glow of the TV screen was no longer endless. Instead, something remarkable happened, something that today feels almost ceremonial. Just before the day ended, the network would offer its closing act, the playing of the national anthem. Picture it. You're a child, already tucked in bed, but still straining your eyes toward that little screen in the corner of the living room. Or perhaps you were a parent, sitting quietly in the recliner after a long day's work. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the television. Then suddenly, the music would begin. The familiar notes of the Star-Spangled Banner rose up, proud and steady, filling the darkened room. Across the screen appeared images of waving flags, soldiers saluting, or a bald eagle soaring through the clouds. It was as though the entire country was being gently reminded, at the close of another ordinary day, that no matter our differences, we all stood under the same banner. And then, just as quickly as it began, it ended. The anthem faded away, the flag dissolved from the screen, and silence took over, broken only by that final hiss of static. The screen filled with snow, tiny black and white dots buzzing and flickering like restless stars. To a child, it felt mysterious, almost eerie. To adults, it was simply the signal. It's time. The day is done. There was a strange comfort in it, though. That ritual told you the world was shutting its eyes, just like you would. The day had an official ending, a moment when the country itself seemed to pause, breathe, and rest. It's a memory that belongs to a very particular era. Before 24-hour news cycles, before endless reruns and streaming on demand, before the idea that entertainment never stops. In those days, life had boundaries. Television, like people, needed to sleep. For some, it became part of their own nighttime rhythm. Parents would switch off the set with a soft click, the room returning to darkness except for the faint glow of the streetlight through the curtains. Children would drift to sleep with the echoes of the anthem still humming in their heads. Even the static, buzzing faintly in the quiet, could lull one into slumber. Looking back, it feels almost ceremonial, like saying grace before a meal or lighting a candle at dusk. The anthem at midnight wasn't just about patriotism. It was about closure. It was about giving shape to the end of the day, marking the moment when the busyness of life had to yield to stillness. Ask anyone who lived it, and they'll tell you that memory is vivid. They remember the hush of the living room, the glow on the faces of their parents, the lump of tiredness in their own eyes. They remember the sudden shift from proud, swelling music to the lonely hiss of static. And strangely enough, it felt reassuring. It was as if the whole country was falling asleep together, each household joined by the invisible thread of television waves fading into silence. Today, of course, the anthem still plays at events, at ball games, at parades, at ceremonies. But that particular ritual, the midnight anthem on television, belongs only to the past. It is a treasure of the 1970s, a quiet reminder of how different the pace of life once was. Now, when we think back, we can almost hear those first stirring notes, see the flag ripple on the screen, feel the hush of the living room. And maybe, just maybe, that memory lulls us again, carrying us back to a time when the day itself seemed to bow its head before the night. There was a time, not so long ago, when even the simplest human need could come with a price tag. In the 1970s, scattered across bus stations, airports, department stores, and busy city corners, you could find small metal turnstiles guarding the entrance to public restrooms. A sign would hang above them, often reading in blocky letters, 10 cents. To use the toilet, you had to feed a dime into the slot. Only then would the heavy steel bar click and the gate allow you through. For adults, it was a small inconvenience, an extra coin to carry, an annoyance in the middle of errands or travel. But for children, it often felt like a test of resourcefulness. A pocket full of pennies wouldn't do. It had to be the exact change, a shiny dime. And if you didn't have one, well, then you had a dilemma on your hands. Many Americans today remember the indignity of it. Imagine being on a long road trip with your family, pulling into a gas station, and realizing you needed to go badly. you'd hurry toward the restroom, only to find that little box demanding its payment. A child might tug at a parent's sleeve, embarrassed, while the parent rummaged through a coin purse or glove compartment, searching for that one small piece of silver. In that moment, relief was literally locked behind 10 cents. It was, in a way, a symbol of the times. America in the 1970s was a land of convenience on the surface. Fast food drive-thrus, supermarkets, color televisions glowing in living rooms, but also a place where small frustrations seemed to pop up everywhere. The pay toilet was one of those irritations people put up with until they decided they wouldn't anymore. By the mid-1970s, a quiet rebellion began. Civic groups, women's organizations, and ordinary citizens started to speak up. They asked, why should anyone have to pay to meet such a basic human need? Why should a person with no dime in their pocket be turned away? It struck many as unfair, even demeaning. There were stories of children stranded on the wrong side of the turnstile, of elderly folks caught unprepared. For women, the situation felt especially unjust, as men's restrooms often had free urinals, while women always faced the locked stalls. That small coin slot began to symbolize something larger, a kind of inequality woven into daily life. The protests were not loud, not in the way of marching bands or shouting picket lines, but they were steady. Signs appeared that read, "Don't pay to pee." Letters were written to city councils. Coins were jammed into locks, deliberately breaking the mechanisms. Slowly, states and municipalities began to listen. One by one, pay toilets were outlawed, dismantled, and hauled away. And yet, for those who lived through it, the memory lingers. People can still recall the metallic clang of the turnstile, the frustration of fishing in pockets for the right coin, the small victory of finally stepping through. Today, it seems almost absurd that such a practice ever existed, but in the 1970s it was an accepted, if resented, part of the landscape. Looking back now, the pay toilet has become more than a curiosity. It is a reminder of how even the smallest injustices can stir people to action. And it is a thread in the larger fabric of memory, woven alongside avocado-green kitchens, console stereos, and Saturday morning cartoons. For many, the pay toilet dilemma is recalled with a shake of the head and a quiet chuckle. But beneath the humor lies a deeper truth, that the everyday struggles, even the trivial ones, are part of what shapes the shared story of a time and place. In the end, it is those very inconveniences that we remember most vividly, because they remind us of how life once was, imperfect, human, and real. There was a time, long before the convenience of automatic ice makers, when every American kitchen had a quiet little ritual tucked away in the freezer. It came in the form of a simple object, the metal ice cube tray. Heavy, cool to the touch, and gleaming with a dull silver finish, it was an invention both practical and stubborn. Children would pull it out with eager hands, curious to see if the water had frozen solid. The tray was often filled the night before, tucked carefully onto a shelf in the freezer, waiting for the moment when someone would come looking for a bit of ice to drop into a glass of cola, lemonade, or sweet tea. And then, the sound. Anyone who lived through the 1970s remembers it clearly. The handle was lifted, stiff at first, and then pushed down with a satisfying force. That sudden crack, a sharp metallic pop, followed by the splintering of frozen water, was like music in the kitchen. A sound so simple yet unforgettable. The ice cubes would tumble free, breaking apart like crystal into neat little rectangles, sliding down into a bowl or rattling across the counter. It wasn't always graceful. The metal could stick to wet fingers, leaving a sting in the skin. Sometimes the lever jammed, forcing an extra tug, and the cubes would come flying out in every direction. A few would skid across the linoleum floor, chased by children or the family dog. And yet, those small frustrations were part of the charm. They made the ritual feel alive. For many, the memory of the metal ice tray is tied to summer afternoons. A pitcher of lemonade set out on the porch, sweating in the heat. The rattle of ice cubes falling into tall glasses. The way sunlight refracted through them, cold and clear, just before the first sip. Or maybe it was the backyard barbecue, with neighbors laughing and the smell of charcoal drifting through the air. Someone would dash into the kitchen, fill the tray, crack the lever, and return with a bowl of ice for everyone's drinks. Guests were always offered ice. It was a gesture of hospitality, a way of saying, make yourself comfortable. Stay a while. The little cubes seemed to hold more than coldness. They held care, effort, and a reminder that even the smallest tasks could connect people. Children, too, found a kind of magic in the trays. They'd sneak into the freezer, pry out a cube, and press it against their lips or the back of their neck on a hot July day. Some would pop one into their mouths, crunching on the frozen shards, despite a parent's warning. It was mischievous, harmless fun. The sort of memory that lingers decades later. And then there were the moments of quiet. Late at night, when the house was still, the only sound might be that metallic crack echoing softly through the kitchen, followed by the gentle clinking of ice cubes settling into a glass. Perhaps it was for a nightcap, perhaps just for water, but it was a sound that belonged to the rhythm of the home. Looking back now, the metal ice cube tray seems almost primitive compared to the sleek refrigerators of today. But to those who lived with them, they were more than tools. They were part of the atmosphere of daily life. The weight of the handle, the sting of the cold, the crash of ice as it broke free. All of it created a sensory memory, as vivid as the smell of coffee in the morning or the crackle of bacon in a skillet. Even though most kitchens today have long since replaced them, the memory endures. For some, it is enough to see one sitting on a flea market shelf to be transported back to a kitchen filled with laughter, to the sound of a dog's nails clicking across the linoleum, to the taste of lemonade poured over freshly cracked cubes of ice. In the end, it was never just about making ice. It was about the shared ritual, the soundscape of the home, and the way even the smallest, coldest cubes could warm the heart through memory. In the 1970s, denim was more than just fabric. It was a second skin, a canvas, a quiet rebellion stitched into every household seam. Almost every closet held a pair of jeans, some worn soft by work, others frayed at the knees from playground slides or late-night concerts. And when those jeans began to show their age, families didn't rush to replace them. Instead, they brought out something that gave clothing a second life. Iron-on patches. There was something magical about those little squares of fabric, stacked neatly on a department store shelf or hanging from hooks at Woolworths. They came in every design you could imagine. bright flowers, playful rainbows, soaring eagles, peace signs, and even cartoon characters. Some were stitched with shimmering thread, others bold and simple. To a child, standing in front of those displays felt like looking at a gallery of tiny treasures. Each patch was more than decoration. It was a way of telling the world who you were, or at least who you wanted to be, at home. The ritual of applying a patch was an event in itself. A mother would plug in the heavy iron, its cord snaking across the kitchen counter, while a child carefully picked out just the right spot on a pair of jeans. The fabric would be smoothed flat, the patch placed just so, and then came the hush, the press of hot metal, the smell of scorched cotton, and the gentle hiss of steam. And when the iron lifted, something ordinary had been transformed. That hole in the knee wasn't just fixed, it was celebrated. For kids, patches became a kind of secret language. A rainbow on the thigh might signal optimism and fun. A peace sign stitched across the back pocket could whisper a quiet hope in a turbulent time. Friends traded them like baseball cards, swapped them at school, and compared who had the boldest designs. Every patch had a story, and every story seemed to last longer than the jeans themselves. It wasn't only children who wore them. Teenagers, too, took pride in their denim, decorating jackets with whole collections of patches, rock bands, slogans, badges from summer camp, or symbols of movements they cared about. Walking down the street in a patched-up denim jacket felt like carrying your identity on your back, one square of fabric at a time. It was fashion, yes, but it was also a kind of diary, stitched in thread and heat. And then there were the quieter moments. A grandmother might use a floral patch to mend an apron, not for style but for practicality. A father might patch the elbow of a work shirt with a sturdy denim square, turning fray into function. Patches weren't just about flair, they were about care, about extending the life of something instead of throwing it away. In that way, they carried a deeper lesson, that mending could be beautiful, and that imperfection could hold its own kind of pride. Looking back now, it's hard not to smile at the memory of those patches. They were never perfect. Some peeled at the edges, others faded in the wash. But that was part of their charm. Like the jeans they covered, they aged alongside us, softening with time until both fabric and patch became inseparable. Today, in a world of fast fashion and disposable everything, those iron-on patches feel like tiny relics from a gentler age. They remind us of kitchen counters cluttered with irons, of the warm smell of cotton under heat, of denim that carried not just wear and tear but also dreams, statements, and laughter. They remind us that clothing once had stories stitched right into its seams, and perhaps that is why, even now, when someone finds an old pair of jeans with a fading rainbow patch still clinging to the knee, it can feel like finding a small treasure. A reminder that in the 1970s, pride didn't always come from having something new. It often came from keeping something old and making it your own. There was a time when music didn't come from a phone in your pocket or through invisible signals streaming from the air. In the 1970s, music often came from a piece of furniture, massive, wooden, and immovable. It was the console stereo. The console wasn't simply a device for playing records. It was a centerpiece, a fixture, something chosen as carefully as a sofa or a dining table. Long and low with polished wood panels, carved trim, and a glossy surface that sometimes doubled as a place to set family photos, it anchored the living room. To walk into a home during those years was to see, in the corner or against the main wall, that heavy wooden cabinet that promised sound. Inside, it held wonders. A record player with its gleaming turntable, a radio tuner with glowing dials, and sometimes a tape deck. Beneath the lid, the smell of varnished wood and warm electronics blended with the faint scent of vinyl sleeves that had been handled and loved 1,000 times. For many families, the console stereo was the heartbeat of evenings. A father might lift the lid, gently remove a record from its sleeve, and place the needle into that first quiet groove. A soft crackle, a moment of anticipation, and then music would pour forth, filling the room in waves that seemed to vibrate the very air. It wasn't just background noise. It was an event. When a favorite record spun, people would sit closer, lean back in their chairs, and let the music saturate every corner of the room. Children lay belly down on the carpet, chins in their hands, eyes wide, as voices and instruments bigger than life echoed from that piece of furniture. The console stereo carried a kind of gravity. Unlike today's portable speakers, you couldn't carry it from room to room. It rooted music to one space, and in turn, it rooted people there as well. Gatherings formed around it. Quiet Sunday afternoons, noisy Saturday nights, or the simple ritual of winding down after supper. Sometimes the console played the latest pop single, the Bee Gees harmonies, or Fleetwood Mac's layered guitars. Other times it was country, Merle Haggard, Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson. In countless homes, it was gospel or hymns on Sunday mornings, the needle tracing sacred grooves as sunlight spilled across the carpet. But the console stereo did more than play records. It staged memories. Teenagers might sneak into the living room, lower the volume just enough so parents wouldn't stir, and play songs that spoke of freedom, rebellion, or first love. Couples might dance slowly, barefoot on the carpet, to the soft crackle of a love ballad. Grandparents might sit quietly, letting a symphony remind them of times when the world felt wider and slower. The sound itself was warm, imperfect, but human. The speakers, built into the cabinet, had a resonance that wasn't sharp or metallic. It was round, rich, a little muffled at the edges. When the bass thumped, you felt it in your chest. When the treble climbed, it shimmered with just enough distortion to make it real. The console stereo was heavy. It wasn't something you replaced often or moved casually. Families kept theirs for years, even decades, its wood darkening with time, its knobs worn smooth by countless hands. And when a console finally gave out, it wasn't simply discarded. It was mourned. Some became sideboards or storage cabinets, the record player no longer turning, but the body of the furniture still standing as a relic. In memory, the console stereo is more than technology. It represents a time when music asked for attention, when it slowed life down. There was no shuffle button, no skipping tracks with a swipe. A record played from beginning to end, and people listened. They let the songs unfold as the artist intended, each track a step in a journey. And perhaps that is why those who grew up with console stereos remember them with such tenderness. They were not just machines. They were companions. They were hearths of sound, gathering families and friends, shaping evenings, and preserving a rhythm of life that has since slipped away. Today, some of those consoles sit forgotten in basements, their cords frayed, their turntables frozen in place. Yet in the memory of those who once knelt by them to flip a record, who sat cross-legged before them in awe, they still hum. The music they carried lingers, warm, steady, alive, as if waiting, even now, to be heard again. There was a time in America when even the most ordinary corner diner carried with it a kind of quiet magic. A place where the smell of frying bacon mingled with the sweet sting of fresh coffee, and the hum of conversation rose and fell like the tide. In those warm, chrome-trimmed booths and under the glow of neon signs, people gathered not just to eat, but to belong. And tucked against a wall, often near the front door, sometimes beside the jukebox, stood a tall, gleaming cigarette machine. It looked almost futuristic back then. Rows of colorful packs displayed behind glass, chrome handles waiting for a firm pull. With just a few coins, the machine would clatter, spring to life, and release a box wrapped in familiar logos. Marlboro, Winston, Cool, Salem. Names that seemed to carry the weight of adulthood itself. For many, these machines were as common as ketchup bottles on the table or the napkin dispenser by the counter. Children noticed them first with curiosity. The shiny levers, the small door at the bottom where the pack would slide out. It was a mechanical wonder, mysterious and grown up. They weren't meant to use them, of course, but every child watched an uncle, an older cousin, or even their own father drop in a dime or a quarter, tug the handle, and walk away with something that felt important. The sound alone, the heavy clunk of the mechanism, was etched into memory. It belonged to the soundtrack of the diner, along with the bell above the door and the hiss of the griddle. For the adults, the machine was convenience. No waiting for a waitress, no trip to the drugstore. A late-night coffee could be paired with a cigarette, purchased right there in the glow of fluorescent lights. It was a ritual, one that felt as natural as ordering a slice of pie or refilling a cup of joe. Looking back, it is almost startling how normal it seemed. Cigarettes, present everywhere, in commercials, in ashtrays on every table, in the pockets of nearly every jacket, were woven into daily life. No one thought twice about walking past a cigarette machine on the way to a family booth. No one blinked at the idea that such machines were placed in spaces where children and teenagers spent their afternoons. And yet, that was the America of the 1970s. A different rhythm, a different understanding of health, of danger, of what it meant to live. For many, the memory of those machines is tied less to the cigarettes themselves and more to the world around them. The Formica counters, the red vinyl stools, the jukebox quietly playing a familiar tune. The machine was simply part of the scenery, as expected as the coffee cups stacked by the register, but memory has a way of softening the edges. Today, when someone recalls a cigarette machine in a diner, they are less likely to think of the smoke and more likely to think of the setting. The gentle chatter of voices, the way the waitress called you hon, the laughter of friends after a Friday night football game. The machine was there, standing silent, humming with its own presence. But what lingers most is the life happening all around it. By the end of the decade, the machines began to vanish. Public attitudes shifted, laws were passed, and what once seemed ordinary suddenly felt out of place. They were quietly removed, one by one, until only memory remained. And yet, for those who lived through that time, the image is unforgettable. Walking into a small-town diner on a chilly evening, shaking the cold from your jacket, sliding into a booth with friends. Somewhere near the door, glowing under the soft light, stood that machine, a relic of its age, a symbol of a culture that could not imagine how quickly the world would change. Today, when people close their eyes and drift back, they don't just remember the cigarette machine. They remember the whole scene, the clinking of forks, the swirl of a straw in a milkshake glass, the scratchy sound of a country song on the jukebox. And in that memory, the machine is still there, chrome shining, offering a small taste of a world that felt simpler, more immediate, more human. There are certain childhood memories that live on, not because they lasted, but because they disappeared so quickly. Few things captured that fleeting sweetness of childhood in the 1970s quite like fruit stripe gum. With its zebra-striped wrappers and wild colors, it was the kind of candy that didn't just sit quietly in a lunchbox or on a store shelf. It shouted for your attention. It was bright, playful, and full of promise, the kind of treasure a child would eagerly spend a few coins on at the corner store. The packaging itself was half the magic. The cheerful zebra mascot, with its bold stripes and mischievous grin, looked like it had stepped straight out of a cartoon. Each stick of gum came wrapped in thin, glossy paper, decorated in stripes of orange, yellow, pink, green, and red. But what made those little wrappers unforgettable was not just their look, it was what they carried inside. Printed on the paper were tiny water transfer tattoos. For a child in the 1970s, these tattoos felt like a prize hidden inside every stick, a secret gift slipped into small hands. You would lick your finger, press the paper to your skin, and wait as the faded image of a rainbow, an animal, or a silly design appeared. The tattoo didn't last long, but neither did the gum. And maybe that was the point. When a stick of fruit stripe touched the tongue, there was an explosion of flavor. It was wild, almost overwhelming, bursting with a sweetness that felt larger than life. For a moment, it was as if your whole mouth had been painted with sugar and fruit. Kids would laugh, eyes wide, smacking their lips at the rush of cherry, lemon, lime, or berry. But then, almost as quickly as it arrived, it was gone. The flavor slipped away within a minute, leaving behind a piece of gum that turned bland and rubbery. And yet, no one really cared, because the joy of fruit stripe wasn't measured in hours. It lived in those first 60 seconds of excitement, when the world seemed brighter and more colorful, when something so small could feel like a carnival inside your mouth. Children would unwrap stick after stick, not because they expected it to last, but because they wanted to chase that moment of magic just one more time. In classrooms, kids would trade them like baseball cards, a pink stripe for a yellow or a green for a red. The gum became a small kind of currency, passed between friends in whispered deals during recess. The tattoos, too, were a source of pride. A child might return home with a faded zebra or rainbow smudged on their arm, proudly showing it off to their siblings as if it were a medal. Parents, of course, often rolled their eyes. They knew fruit stripe was more sugar than substance. But even adults couldn't help but smile at the sight of their children tearing into those colorful wrappers, delighted by a treat that asked for nothing more than a few moments of joy. Looking back, Fruit Stripe gum feels like a symbol of the decade itself. Bright, colorful, a little over the top, and gone too soon. The 1970s were full of bold designs and playful experiments, from avocado-colored kitchens to psychedelic wallpaper, and Fruit Stripe fit right in. It wasn't about lasting value. It was about fun, here and now, in the moment. And that's why, for many, Fruit Stripe has never been forgotten. It taught a quiet lesson, one that only becomes clear years later. Sometimes, the sweetest parts of life are not the ones that endure, but the ones that pass quickly, leaving behind only a smile and a memory. So even now, if someone happens to spot a pack on a dusty store shelf or in a retro candy shop, they can't resist picking it up. Not because they expect the flavor to stay, but because holding that pack, unwrapping that striped paper, and tasting that brief burst of sweetness brings them back. Back to a schoolyard, back to sticky fingers and silly tattoos, back to a time when joy was simple, colorful, and never meant to last forever. There was a time in the 1970s when an unassuming little figure quietly made her way into American homes, not through television screens or billboards, but through the humble objects of daily life. Her name was Holly Hobbie. With her oversized bonnet, patchwork dress, and gentle posture, she wasn't loud or glamorous. She didn't shout for attention. Instead, she whispered a kind of sweetness into a world that, in many ways, was moving faster and louder than ever before. Children of the 1970s remember her first as an illustration. Soft watercolor lines on greeting cards. These cards, often sent between mothers and daughters, between friends, carried her presence across the country. Her world was one of simple friendship, kindness, and quiet beauty. Unlike the bold, neon-colored toys that filled store shelves, Holly Hobbie seemed to exist in a softer palette. Gentle blues, browns, and the warm, faded tones of country fabric. It didn't take long for Holly Hobbie to step off the paper and into the fabric of American childhood. She became dolls, simple rag dolls, often stitched with care. Some were store-bought, with neat seams and polished packaging. Others were lovingly handmade by grandmothers or mothers, pieced together with old cloth scraps, each stitch a thread of love. For a little girl, holding a Holly Hobbie doll meant holding on to something that felt safe, old-fashioned, and deeply personal. Her image spread to lunchboxes, bedspreads, and even kitchenware. Children carried her to school, wore her on pajamas, and fell asleep beneath quilts stitched with her tiny bonneted figure. She was never about flash or fashion. She was about comfort, about the kind of charm that reminded people of a quieter past, even as the world was pressing forward into modernity. For many mothers of the 1970s, Holly Hobbie was more than just a child's toy or decoration. She was a reminder of their own girlhood, of a time before disco balls and polyester pants, when life seemed simpler and more connected to hearth and home. Holly Hobbie represented an ideal of sweetness and innocence that parents hoped to pass down, even in an era of rapid change. What made Holly Hobbie different from so many other icons of childhood was her gentleness. There was no edge to her, no loud slogan, no need for constant reinvention. Just a bonnet pulled low, eyes hidden in a kind of modesty, and a body turned often toward a flower, a friend, or a tiny bird perched nearby. She embodied a world where kindness was enough and where beauty lived in the ordinary. For some children, Hobbie became the quiet companion of their private world. They might sit her on the edge of a bed, whisper secrets to her stitched smile, or imagine her living in a small cottage in the countryside, baking pies or tending a little garden. These weren't the high-energy adventures of superheroes or cowboys. They were gentler, smaller, but no less meaningful. And while Hobbie's fame eventually faded, her memory lingers in the minds of those who grew up with her. They recall the feel of her fabric doll in their hands, the way her picture brightened a lunchbox, or the comfort of seeing her stitched into a quilt. Today, when one stumbles across a vintage Hobbie item at a flea market or tucked away in a box of keepsakes, it's not just an object. It's a doorway back into a moment of childhood tenderness. In many ways, Hobbie was the queen of cute in 1970s America. But hers was not a commercialized cuteness. It was not designed to overwhelm. It was designed to endure. Quietly, softly, in the corners of memory. She became a kind of symbol for an era when sweetness could still hold its own, when gentle illustrations could compete with flashing lights and booming sounds, and when a simple little figure in a bonnet could capture the heart of a generation. Even now, her image carries with it a kind of sigh, a reminder that innocence, once treasured, never fully disappears. Hobbie remains a small but unforgettable treasure of the 1970s, her quiet charm still glowing like a faded watercolor, tucked into the memory of those who once called her their own. It was a sound that could freeze a room in an instant. One moment, the soft chatter of a television program filled the living room, the laugh track of a sitcom, or perhaps the steady voice of the evening news anchor. And then, it came. That shrill, piercing tone. A sound that seemed to cut straight through the air and rattle the nerves. This is a test. This is only a test. For children of the 1970s, those words are remembered with a mix of dread and fascination. The emergency broadcast system was designed to prepare the nation for a moment none ever wanted to face. A real national emergency. But to the families sitting in their living rooms, it was simply an interruption. Unwelcome, startling, and strangely unforgettable. The tone was long and high, unlike anything else on television. It wasn't the friendly jingle of a commercial or the comforting melody of a theme song. It was harsh, insistent, and impossible to ignore. Grown-ups would often sigh, irritated at the intrusion. They knew it was just a test. But children? Children often stared wide-eyed at the screen, feeling a chill of unease. The screen itself didn't help matters. Sometimes it flashed bold words across a colored background. This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. The letters were stark and unadorned, as if they had been typed on a government typewriter. No cartoons, no smiling faces, just plain official text accompanied by that awful sound. To a child, it almost felt like the world was about to end. There was something about that moment that reminded everyone just how fragile life could be. The Cold War loomed in the background of American life, whispered about in classrooms, hinted at in news stories, and hanging like a shadow over even the simplest joys. That piercing tone was not just a test of the television system, it was, in a sense, a reminder of the world's worries. And yet, like so many things from the 1970s, it became part of the fabric of memory. Families grew used to it, even as they disliked it. Parents would use it as a chance to refill their coffee or to tell the kids to get ready for bed. Children might cover their ears or hide behind the couch, peeking out nervously until the program returned. It became, in its own odd way, a ritual. Those few moments, shrill sound, flat screen, official voice, were shared by every household that owned a television. It didn't matter whether you lived in a small rural town or a bustling city apartment. That sound was universal. Looking back now, it is almost quaint. Today's world is filled with smartphones that buzz with alerts, televisions that scroll breaking news across the bottom of the screen, and endless streams of information that arrive in real time. But in the 1970s, that single piercing tone was the nation's warning bell. It was the sound of preparedness, of vigilance, and it was also, strangely enough, the sound of a simpler era, because once the test was over, once the announcer's calm voice assured everyone that this was only a test, life slipped easily back into its ordinary rhythm. The sitcom laughed again, the news anchor returned, the world continued on as if nothing had happened. Children breathed a sigh of relief, parents settled back into their chairs, and the living room once again became a place of safety and comfort. Even now, when that sound occasionally resurfaces in old recordings, it can stir up an entire wave of memory. For some, it brings back the feeling of sitting cross-legged on shag carpet, the glow of the television casting soft light on wood-paneled walls. For others, it recalls the quiet tension of an era when everyone knew that the test was practice for something far more serious. But above all, it reminds us that even the most dreaded interruptions of the past have become part of the story we carry. The emergency broadcast test was unsettling, yes, but it was also a thread woven into the larger tapestry of 1970s life. A sound that interrupted laughter and comfort, only to return us to them again. And perhaps that is why it lingers in memory, because it was a reminder that even in uneasy times, life found its way back to normal. There are certain sounds, textures, and sensations that belong uniquely to the 1970s. Among them, perhaps none is remembered with as much reluctant fondness as the plastic couch cover. Shiny, stiff, and just a little unforgiving, it was a household fixture that spoke volumes about the era's priorities: protection, durability, and a belief that nothing was too precious to guard against the wear and tear of everyday life. Picture, if you will, a living room on a hot summer afternoon. The blinds are half drawn, letting in streaks of golden light that dance across the thick carpet. The centerpiece of the room is the sofa, floral patterns hidden beneath a crystal-clear sheet of vinyl. At first glance, it gleams with an almost museum-like perfection. But sit down, and the truth of it comes rushing back. The plastic sticks to your skin, especially in July and August. Children in shorts would shift uncomfortably, leaving behind little imprints of knees and elbows. When they stood up, there'd often be a faint peeling sound, like tape being lifted away. And yet, this discomfort was part of the ritual, part of the memory. Grandmothers were often the guardians of these couches. They saw the fabric underneath as something worth preserving forever. The floral upholstery, the golden velour, or the muted earth tones. These patterns represented an investment, a pride in owning something new and clean. And so, Wrapped in plastic, the sofa became both a usable piece of furniture and a shrine to its own protection. Children were reminded not to bounce, not to spill, and certainly not to eat while seated there. In many homes, the couch under its shiny armor looked brand new for decades, untouched by the stains of coffee or the smudges of little hands. For kids, though, those couch covers told another story. They were the backdrop for playful afternoons, when cousins piled onto the sofa, laughing as the plastic squeaked beneath them. They were a source of endless teasing, brothers daring each other to sit without wincing, or to survive a nap without waking up in a pool of sweat. In winter, the covers grew cold and rigid, so sitting down felt like lowering yourself onto a block of ice. In summer, they warmed to the point of stickiness, creating a challenge no child ever forgot. There was a strange beauty to them, too. When the afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, the glossy surface reflected light in odd, rippling patterns. The plastic caught the colors of the room, the greens of the shag carpet, the warm oranges of a lamp's glow, and turned them into something hazy, dreamlike. Looking back now, those reflections feel like a metaphor for the way memory works, clear, yet blurred by time, shining with a sheen of nostalgia. Visitors often noticed them right away. Aunts and uncles would exchange knowing looks, silently acknowledging that this was a house that valued preservation. And to many children of the era, the good room with its plastic-covered furniture carried an unspoken rule: behave. It wasn't just a couch, it was part of the family's presentation, a symbol of dignity and care. Today, plastic couch covers might seem like an odd relic, something to joke about or shake our heads at. But for those who lived with them, they represent a deeper truth about American life in the 1970s. Families didn't have endless money to replace things. They stretched what they had, they protected what they worked for, and they took pride in keeping things looking nice. That vinyl barrier, uncomfortable as it was, tells a story of thrift, of respect for possessions, and of the kind of practicality that defined an entire generation. And yet, beyond the practicality, there's the memory, the laughter of children sticking to the couch, the gentle scolding of grandparents reminding everyone to sit carefully, the way the plastic squeaked during long phone calls when you shifted in your seat to get comfortable. It's these small, almost inconvenient details that stay with us the longest. When we think back to those days, we don't just remember the plastic covers themselves. We remember the people around them, the warmth of family gathered in a living room that smelled faintly of Sunday dinner, the safety of knowing that life, like the sofa, was being carefully preserved. And while the plastic couches have mostly disappeared, tucked away in memory or discarded long ago, the feelings they carried remain. They are more than an odd footnote of interior design. They are, in their own way, one of the treasures of a decade that valued both comfort and care. There was something almost sacred about Saturday mornings in the 1970s. For a child, it was a time of freedom, when the whole week's worth of schoolwork and responsibilities melted away. The living room, usually reserved for quiet evenings and family gatherings, was suddenly transformed into a playground of sound and color. Children would rise earlier than on school days, sometimes before the sun had even lifted above the rooftops, padding across shag carpet floors in their pajamas. Cereal bowls were filled to the brim, spoons clinking against the porcelain as milk splashed and spilled in the hurry to catch the opening theme of a favorite show. On the screen, the cartoons felt larger than life. Animated worlds of heroes, animals, and slapstick gags flooded the senses. The laughter of Bugs Bunny, the chase of Tom and Jerry, the music of Scooby-Doo's mystery-solving adventures, all of it stitched together the fabric of a childhood spent in front of a humming television set. The commercials in between seemed like part of the show itself. Jingles for sugary cereals, toy cars, and board games that promised endless fun. Every sound, every burst of color was woven into the rhythm of a Saturday morning. Yet, tucked between the excitement, there were moments that today feel almost surreal. The public service announcements, PSAs, would appear suddenly, interrupting the light-hearted cartoons with a message that felt both serious and strangely out of place. They were little lessons disguised in rhyme or song, designed to stick in the memory of a child. One of the most famous was the odd little jingle, "Don't drown your food." With cheerful animation, it warned children against smothering vegetables in butter or sauces. Another PSA showed a cheerful superhero named Schoolhouse Rock, teaching multiplication or the basics of government. There were messages about nutrition, about safety, about saying no to strangers, all packaged in the bright, cartoonish style of the era. For a child, these announcements were confusing at times. One moment, they were watching a coyote chase a roadrunner through the desert. The next, they were being lectured about the food pyramid or the dangers of littering. But in their own peculiar way, these PSAs became part of the Saturday ritual too. They were part of the rhythm, part of the shared experience. Looking back, there was something comforting in their repetition. The same jingles, the same slogans, appearing week after week until they were etched into memory. Even now, decades later, many can still recall the tune of "I'm Just a Bill" sitting on Capitol Hill, or the lively chant teaching that 3 times 3 equals 9. These lessons might have seemed silly at the time, but they carried a kind of innocence that reflected the hopes of a generation, that children could grow up smarter, healthier, and more aware if they only listened for a minute in between their cartoons. And then, of course, came the quiet aftermath. When the last cartoon ended and the clock crept toward noon, the magic of Saturday morning would slowly fade. The local news or a sports broadcast would take over the airwaves, and children were sent outside to play, still humming the jingles that had slipped into their heads. The PSAs had done their job. They had become invisible threads stitched into the fabric of memory. For many, those mornings were about more than entertainment. They were about ritual. The sound of a cereal box opening, the soft hum of the television warming up, the cheerful chaos of cartoons and the odd seriousness of public service messages. All of it combined into something unforgettable. Today, when one thinks back to those Saturday mornings, there is a sweetness that rises with the memory. It is not just the cartoons or the PSAs themselves, but the feeling of being young in a simpler world. A world where time seemed to stretch endlessly, where lessons could be learned in rhyme, and where a child could begin the weekend with laughter, milk mustaches, and the soft glow of a television set that seemed, for a little while, to belong entirely to them. There was a time, not so long ago, when you could walk into almost any American kitchen and be greeted not by stainless steel or granite countertops, but by a symphony of colors that seemed lifted right out of a garden. It was the 1970s, and kitchens were alive with shades of avocado-green and harvest gold. Imagine stepping inside on a quiet Saturday morning. The refrigerator, a deep olive hue, hums softly in the corner. Its rounded edges and heavy handle give it a sturdiness, a sense that it could stand guard for decades. Next to it, the stove blazes with mustard yellow enamel, each knob clicking with a satisfying firmness. And against the wall, patterned wallpaper, swirling oranges, browns, and golds, creates a backdrop that feels like stepping into a psychedelic painting. These kitchens weren't designed to be sleek or subtle. They were loud, cheerful, and unapologetically bold. The colors carried a warmth that, for many, still lingers in memory like the smell of fresh coffee. For children growing up then, it was normal. Pots clattering on avocado stovetops, meals served on plates rimmed with golden daisies, and plastic tumblers that seemed to glow under the afternoon sun. Avocado-green was the reigning king. It covered everything from appliances to countertops to those vinyl-cushioned chairs that squeaked when you shifted in your seat. There was something earthy and grounding about it, as if the kitchen itself were a little piece of nature brought indoors. Harvest gold followed close behind, bright, honeyed, and endlessly optimistic. Together, they formed the palette of family life, as essential as the wooden spoon stirring a pot of chili or the cookie jar waiting on the counter. Families gathered here not just to eat, but to live. A child might spread out their school books on the avocado-topped table while their mother simmered soup on the stove. Teenagers leaned against gold-colored counters, chatting on phones with tangled cords stretched halfway across the room. Fathers came home from work, loosening their ties as they opened the refrigerator door and reached for a cold bottle of soda. And then there was the light. In the evening, when a single bulb glowed above the kitchen table, the warm colors seemed to soften the edges of the day. Shadows played across patterned curtains, and the room became a sanctuary, a place where the world outside could wait. Even now, those who remember it can almost feel the vinyl chair beneath them, hear the tick of the wall clock, and smell the casserole baking in a Pyrex dish. Of course, the look was not without its critics. Some rolled their eyes at the dizzying wallpaper patterns or laughed at the endless shades of green and gold. But for many, there is a sweetness in those memories, a comfort in recalling a kitchen that was bursting with character and life. In a way, those kitchens embodied the era itself, bold, experimental, and unafraid of color. Even small details became part of the memory. A harvest gold blender whirring to life on a Sunday afternoon. A bread box painted avocado, holding loaves wrapped in paper. A radio perched on the counter, its dial glowing as it played the hits of Fleetwood Mac or the Bee Gees. The kitchen was never just a room. It was the heart of the home, pulsing with sound, scent, and color. Today, when we look back, those avocado kitchens and harvest gold dreams may feel almost whimsical, like something out of a retro magazine. But for those who lived them, they were real, vibrant, and deeply familiar. They were the backdrop to countless everyday moments. Morning breakfasts before school, laughter shared over late-night snacks, and quiet evenings when the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. And so, even though styles have changed and kitchens today sparkle in steel and glass, the memory of those green and gold havens still lingers. They remind us that beauty doesn't always come from perfection. Sometimes it comes from the bold, the ordinary, and the deeply familiar. For those who remember, closing your eyes can bring it all back. The golden stove, the green refrigerator, the patterned walls, and the sense of warmth that wrapped itself around every meal. A kitchen, not just of color, but of comfort. There was a certain kind of magic in the ordinary details of the 1970s, those little conveniences and curiosities that seemed, at the time, so modern, so clever, so full of wonder. Take, for instance, the drive-thru bank tubes. To an adult, they were simply practical, an efficient way to deposit a check or withdraw cash without ever leaving the car. But to a child in the back seat, those clear plastic cylinders were closer to rocket ships than banking equipment. The ritual was always the same. The car would roll up to the teller window, often shaded beneath a wide overhang. A parent would place the paperwork, maybe a deposit slip and a few checks, into the smooth plastic tube. And then, this was the moment children leaned forward for. The lid would snap shut with a satisfying click, and with the push of a button, the entire cylinder would vanish upward with a loud whoosh. The tube shot into the sky, pulled by vacuum suction, disappearing into the bank's mysterious system of pipes. Children would crane their necks, eyes wide, trying to follow its path, imagining it racing through twisting tunnels like a marble on a roller coaster. A moment later, another whoosh would echo back, and the cylinder would reappear, dropping gently into the car's outstretched hands. Inside was money, or a receipt, or maybe a lollipop the teller had thoughtfully included. For kids, it felt like sorcery. For parents, it was the future arriving in the palm of their hand. It's almost impossible to explain to younger generations today, raised on smartphones and instant digital transactions, just how remarkable those tubes once felt. They transformed the most ordinary errand, going to the bank, into a small family event, a break in the monotony of the drive. Children would argue over who got to open the canister, who got to hold it, who got to press the button. The machine, with its simple hiss and thud, was as exciting as a toy, even though it was just another piece of mid-century ingenuity. And then there were the mood rings. If the bank tubes felt like science fiction, the mood ring was closer to magic. A ring that could read your emotions, changing color to reflect the state of your heart and mind. Of course, in truth, it was nothing more than liquid crystal reacting to body heat. But to a generation of kids in the 1970s, it felt like something out of a fairy tale. The rings were usually inexpensive, sold at novelty shops, 5 and dime counters, or tucked into the impulse racks at checkout stands. They came in small velvet boxes or cheap plastic packaging, accompanied by little color charts that explained the supposed meanings. Blue meant calm, green meant relaxed, black meant stressed, and purple, well, purple meant you were in love. Children would slip them onto their fingers, waiting with wide eyes as the dark stone began to swirl, shifting like a tiny storm cloud trapped under glass. Was it really telling the truth? Was it possible that this ring knew something about them they hadn't even admitted to themselves? In schoolyards and backyards, kids compared colors and teased one another. Yours is purple. You must have a crush. It was all in good fun, a blend of innocence and imagination that only childhood can bring. The mood ring was more than a gimmick. It was a conversation starter, a way for kids to share secrets, to laugh, to believe in a little mystery. In many ways, it reflected the spirit of the 1970s itself, a decade caught between technology and wonder, between practicality and play. Looking back, both the Drive-Thru tubes and the mood rings were simple things: plastic, glass, air pressure, and heat-sensitive chemicals. Yet they held the power to spark joy, to turn an errand into an adventure, or a trinket into a treasure. When people close their eyes now and think of that era, they don't just remember the big cultural shifts or the headline moments. They remember the whoosh of the bank tube, carrying with it the magic of movement. They remember the shimmer of a tiny ring, its colors shifting like emotions you could suddenly hold in your hand. In the quiet of memory, these things remain, symbols of a time when even the smallest details of everyday life could feel extraordinary. And perhaps that is why they linger so vividly, long after the technology has changed, and long after the mood rings have been tucked away in forgotten drawers. They remind us that childhood wonder is never really lost. It simply hides in the simplest of places, waiting to be remembered. There's a quiet truth about memory. It rarely clings to the big headlines or the sweeping events of a decade. More often, it hides in the corners of ordinary life. Inside the orange glow of a Tupperware lid, the sharp crack of ice cubes freeing themselves from a metal tray, or the faint scratch of a vinyl record spinning in a living room that smelled faintly of wood polish. For those who lived through the 1970s, these little treasures did not feel extraordinary at the time. They were simply part of the rhythm of everyday living. Yet now, decades later, they carry a weight far greater than their size. Each one holds the laughter of a family crowded around a television set, the taste of a grilled cheese at Woolworth's, the quiet pride of a patched pair of denim jeans that told its own story. These objects and moments were never meant to last forever. Plastic yellows, fabrics wear thin, and technology moves relentlessly forward. The foil-wrapped antenna gave way to satellites and streaming. The console stereo was replaced by pocket-sized devices that carry whole libraries of music. Even the pay toilets and cigarette machines, so common once, disappeared into the shadows of history. But in memory, they remain untouched. In memory, they are golden. Nostalgia has a way of softening the edges. It takes the discomfort of sticking to a plastic-covered couch in the summer and turns it into something tender. Because behind that memory is the vision of grandparents who wanted to keep their furniture safe, of a house filled with the hum of family voices. It takes the beep of the emergency broadcast test, once so jarring, and folds it into the wider soundscape of a decade when families gathered around one screen, together, waiting for the picture to return. Each forgotten treasure is more than just a relic of design or convenience. It is a bridge, a thread woven through time, connecting the child who sniffed a brand new pencil in a classroom to the adult who, years later, still remembers that curious scent. It connects the young boy who pressed a mood ring onto his finger, watching it shift colors like magic, to the man who now understands that the real magic was in believing, and perhaps that is the true comfort of these memories. They remind us that our lives were never built on grand gestures alone, but on the small rituals and objects that made each day feel whole. They remind us that even in a fast-changing world, there is beauty in the simple, the ordinary, the overlooked. As the night deepens and the firelight crackles gently, let these images settle softly in the mind. A vinyl red diner stool, a bright gum wrapper, the glimmer of harvest gold in a kitchen bathed in afternoon sun. Let them gather together like old friends around a table, offering not noise or urgency, but peace for those listening now, perhaps lying in bed, perhaps drifting close to sleep. Know that you carry these treasures with you. They live in your memory, and no passage of time can take them away. They are waiting whenever you wish to return, so close your eyes. Allow the weight of the day to slip away, and let the warmth of these memories guide you gently toward rest. The 1970s, with all its ordinary wonders, will still be there in the morning, quietly shining in the corners of your heart. Thank you for spending this time together tonight. From all of us here at Sleepytown Radio, may your dreams be easy, may your sleep be deep, and may your heart be light. Good night, dear friend. Sleep well.